So Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. The first question I have for you is, how is the recovery of Los Angeles World Airports actually going at the moment?
It's moving forward slowly but steadily. We had our best post-COVID week last weekend actually. We finally broke a 100,000 passenger mark for our screenings, meaning over 100,000 passengers coming to the airport to take a flight somewhere. So it's coming back. As of right now, we're still though about 75% of the total volume pre-2019. That's close to 80% on domestic and down around 65% on international. International is still lagging.
Well, congrats on the good numbers. How is the airport coping? Have you got enough staff to meet this surge in demand, or how are things?
The airport does. Airport Authority is staffed adequately to meet the demand. We're getting our concessions back, so that has been an issue through COVID, is having enough staff for the stores, the restaurants, and so forth. So those are coming back. For the most part, they're back in service. Airlines are still struggling with their crew situation. I think is much reported issue related to pilots and flight crew. And so thus have drawn their schedules down at LAX a little bit from what they had originally planned on. But we're getting there. Slowly but surely we're getting back.
And what are your challenges for the year ahead?
I think the challenges will be just exactly that. Is as we see travel coming back, is being able to have the resources, have the crews, both the flight crews, ground crews, above the wing, below the wing providers, having aircraft available. In some cases, some of those aircraft are coming back in service, have been out of service for several years. So I think that's going to be the challenge, is putting the resources in front of the demand. What we're seeing at LAX is a solid demand, both domestically and especially internationally. Since we are a major international gateway, particularly to Asia, we see high levels of occupancy. We see high load factors on the flights that are being offered. And as we see restrictions starting to drop, particularly from the US to the Asian countries, then I think we're going to see a lot of demand. It's going to be a challenge, I think, to meet that with resource through the fall.
And during the pandemic, airports have realized that they really need to be more agile in the case of another pandemic. So what changes have you made to your business model to reflect that?
Probably the largest single change we made, Holly, was in the way we handled our common use facilities. A lot of Los Angeles is a little bit unique among major hub airports. We don't have a dominant carrier, and we have a lot of our terminals are leased to the legacy carriers, particularly the domestic carriers. So our common use facilities had operated at a steady state for years, and the charges were based on use. Well, as that use plummeted, that business model was no longer valid because the pricing for an individual aircraft call was too high. So we've changed that business model. We're now operating all of our common use. In this case, our Bradley terminal, both the east and west gates for international, is now being operated directly by the Airport Authority. And we've we stabilized the rates so that those carriers that are using it are paying a competitive rate, whether we have a lot of traffic or whether we have just a little. That made a big difference, and we believe we were able to sustain what international operations were going at the time because of that. So that was probably the largest. There were many other areas we had to be agile in. Certainly, we've seen changes in our landside operation as the transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, had major problems. We saw a big shift back to passenger-operated vehicles into our central terminal area. So, even today, you'd see at LAX we have very crowded traffic conditions, and we have most of our parking is occupied. So we pushed hard and we put in service a brand new 4,000 spot parking facility just in time. and that parking facility has occasionally completely filled up. So it took a lot of agility to make it through, along with dozens of other smaller things.
And I mean, you mentioned that parking, non-aviation revenues. What did you do to bolster that area?
Non-aviation revenues were tough. We took a big hit on that. As we got into the depths of COVID, and we saw concessions particularly drop precipitously, we tried our best to support those companies so that they wouldn't completely go out of business. We were assisted by the CARES Act, which was passed by U.S. Congress, and it gave us some funding. We were able to provide rent relief to a number of our concessions so they could stay in business and be in a position to where they could come back. And as we see that, that's having a big improvement on our non-aviation revenue. The other thing that I mentioned was our parking structure. As we brought that online and as we saw more use, that has actually been above 2019 levels on revenue coming from parking.
Are you looking to introduce any new services in the future?
Part of the parking program was to change that model as well, so that we now have a service offered of advance reservations, which actually gives passengers a lower rate when they reserve in advance, especially for a longer period. We also introduced valet parking. Another thing was introduced, and it wasn't revenue driven, but more it was service driven, was the ability to order food remotely throughout the terminals. So we have that ability, and that has been embraced by passengers. It was helpful when the number of concessions was limited, but it's still there, and it's still being used, where a passenger at a gate can order a meal from almost anywhere in the airport.
And what trends are you seeing coming through with your passengers at the moment, and which do you think will be here to stay long term?
I think the trend we're seeing, which is solid and it's here to stay, is biometrics. We put a huge investment in biometric boarding. When we put in our new Bradley West gates, every one of those gates has biometric boarding. And now we have a significant number of airlines, about 20 airlines, fully capable of doing one-step biometric boarding at LAX. Very efficient, very customer friendly. So we have also seen the use of biometrics in self-bag drop. We have a domestic carrier, Spirit Airlines, who has just installed their own single-step self-bag drop, which is quite popular. We see that happening more and more. Biometrics in other areas are going to be important. Our Transportation Security Administration is piloting some biometrics. Customs and Border Protection has been using biometrics at LAX for over a year now, and it's very well accepted, and it's gotten very efficient. So I think that's a trend we're going to see more and more of in the airport world, and I believe that it's here to stay.
And have you launched any exciting passenger experience initiatives, or will be in the future?
Well, I think at this point we're trying to recover the passenger experience resources we have. We have our PUPS program, the puppies unstressing passengers. We're getting that brought back up to speed and bringing those pups into the airports. We have our VIPs, volunteers, who had to sit on the sidelines for much of COVID. Now they're coming back. We're retraining and recognizing them in ways that are going to be able to embellish the guest experience as we get busy this summer and in the holidays. We have some exciting things happening in Los Angeles this summer. We have the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. We have the U.S. College Football Championship game in Los Angeles in January, which will be very similar to the Super Bowl that we had. We get World Cup in a year or so. So we're looking for a lot of neat events coming, and we hope to, in about a year and a half, unveil and put in service probably the best thing we can do to our passengers, and that's our automated people mover, which will give passengers a whole new pathway into the airport. They won't have to be driving into the central terminal. So those are all in the works.
And sustainability is really important. What sustainability projects do you have in the pipeline?
We're working very closely with a number of parties to try to enhance our solar footprint at not only Los Angeles International, but also at our Van Nuys General Aviation Airport. We have, our board just passed a new electric vehicle policy. We're purchasing almost all of our vehicles that can be purchased electric are being purchased electric. We have an exciting initiative going with our utility partner, the Department of Water and Power, looking at hydrogen options. And there are a number of hydrogen applications that we could put against aviation, not only in terms of fueling our utility facilities, but also looking at where we can put that in for mobile uses.
So in your opinion, what are the 3 most exciting developments taking place at LAWA this year?
The biggest is getting our capital program progressed. One of the things we were very fortunate to be able to do during COVID was keep our capital program going. So we're in the midst of a $15 billion program. The centerpiece of that is our people mover, along with a consolidated rental car facility and some terminal improvements. So through COVID, we were able to keep that going, and in some cases, we actually accelerated it. So the number one thing going forward is to keep that moving. Delta Airlines put their new terminal in service last month. They're going to continue to add gates to that new terminal. So this next year, we'll be working hard on that. We'll be making solid progress on our people mover. Again, about 1.5 years away from delivery on that one. And also several other terminal improvements that will be starting. So that's probably the biggest things that we're looking at going forward right now.
And what is your business outlook for the future? Are you positive?
Very positive. We believe we have a wonderful franchise at LAX. We have great employees, we have great partners. All of our airline partners are very bullish on LA, and we're seeing them devote a lot of resource and dedicate a lot of effort to taking advantage of that. We've seen a number of new airlines coming in, so we think that the future is very bright at LAX.
That was my last question, so thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, you're welcome.